Hello and welcome back to the Christmas Eve Extravaganza. Well, it's really not that extravagant. The weather, my God, the entire country is in a deep freeze. Yesterday we had 24 hours of torrential rain and 51 degrees. Parts of Georgia were in the single digits. We're up here over 50 degrees. Thank God, because if that was a freezing temperatures at the same time, we'd be digging out for days. One of these times it'll happen. And the wind, I don't know if I've ever experienced that much wind for that amount of time. You know, usually you get something going to blow through, it goes away in a few hours. This blew for 24 hours. Ridiculous. But the roads got all washed down. All my snow and ice is gone. The stars are out last night. I walked down to the garage. I worked down here a little bit, cleaning my bench and whatnot. Walked back up to the house, looked out the window an hour later, and everything's white. A small burst gave about a quarter of an inch of snow and everything while the temperatures were plummeting, and that made the salt trucks go out and put about 7,000 tons of salt on the road. So we had it, and then we lost it. Because I was sick, and I'd be cruising the 55 all week. I mean, everything was clean. And then it wasn't. Oh, well. I have a lot of great memories of Christmas Eve. I hope you do as well. It became the night that we opened gifts in my family. Out of necessity originally. The story goes it was a giant snowstorm in the late 60s. And my mom thought she had some tools that would help out my dad. By the time we dragged all the bags of everything, because she was going to wrap it Christmas Eve, everything was still in bags. We just kind of tore into it, and that was Christmas. And it became good because, you know, as kids get older, they get a significant other. They might want to go to, or they get married, and they go to a different family on Christmas. My mother called Christmas Eve, and we gathered for decades. It was awesome. Lots of good memories. So the last couple days, my mind, it's funny how things happen. I have a lot of good friends, and I hope you do as well, that you can talk 3 minutes ago or 3 years ago, and the conversation's the same because it just picks up where it left off. One of those friends of mine, Jim, October 28th, of 2011, I sold him this perfect bodied crew cab dually square body. Now, sidebar on the square body, I've owned 9 or 10 dually pickups since I've been driving. 3/4 of them were square bodies, or what's now called square bodies. We didn't call them that. They were just 73 through 87. CK, and then the RV continued in the square body line until 91, only in a 1-ton R&V. So it's kind of odd, and I wonder when I say square body if somebody isn't cringing like I do when you say stroker. Who knows? But anyway, I had this square body Chevy. It sat right behind me, facing this way, clogging up my shop. It was quite a story the night I bought it. Started like any other night back before Marketplace and even the internet was super popular. Here in Maine, every Thursday night, the Uncle Henry's magazine came out. Little magazine paper about this big, 75 cents, I think it was. And those were the fresh ads that came out every Thursday night. So that's when all the deals happened. Now, no pictures. You know, just a phone number. If you can imagine, that's how we bought things. So I bought one on a Thursday afternoon on the way home. And I remember sitting out back here somewhere before it was as open as it was. I was sitting on something, looking through it, and there it was. Only 4 towns over. So next thing you know, I'm at the guy's house. We made a deal. It had a small block in it at the time, originally a big block truck. And here's where the story gets kind of odd. He claimed to be an aircraft mechanic, And if you saw the installation of this motor, I'm not sure how the truck made it to my house, because he offered to drive it down if he could get enough beers in him. He had to stop a couple times. We're talking a 25-minute ride. And on that night, he'd stopped for another beer at his house, halfway between where the truck was and my house. And I took off in my Tahoe I was driving at the time, and the fuel pump quit. So next thing you know, I'm riding with him in the dually. Belts are squealing because the way they were routed, I don't know why they didn't just fall off. But we made it here, and I had to take another car, give him a ride home with the promise, because I was supposed to pull the engine out of it that night. He had nothing planned other than drink beer, so I gave him a ride home, and I pulled the motor out the next day, pushed it here in the garage. It was too nice to leave outside. Now, when you put a crew cab dually in the middle of your shop, that really clogs it up, and there it's set. And a lot of times, I am odd at the way I go about things, and so was this guy. He had stained the interior this awful, awful blue. Yeah, a little blue in that. Royal blue, maybe. Everything. He got it on the windows. It was gross. So one night, another buddy of mine, same deal. If he called now, we'd start talking like we talked yesterday, even though we haven't. Dave, and Dave pulled all the interior out of it. Dave loves square bodies as much as I do, maybe more. And we pulled all the interior out of it. And Jim's still mad about that because he hasn't put it back in yet. And like I often do, I started working on the mechanical. I went and found a 24-valve Cummins in pieces. The guy worked at the Cummins dealer. He had collected a bunch of parts. And it was literally in boxes. Now, I'd never had a 24-valve Cummins apart, but I put it all back together. And he had got me a injection pump off a tour bus. Supposed to have a little more power. We changed the keyway. I learned a lot of things about Cummins, and I really respect the quality of that engine. I could reuse everything. The bearings, the rings, nothing needed to be replaced. And I had the dash out of the Freightliner FedEx truck it came out of. So FedEx truck, imagine the life that thing had. Little short one. It was a delivery truck. And 215,000. And this motor was perfect. I don't know why they took the truck apart, but long story short, I ended up with the motor and the Allison 2000 with park, because they came either way. The one in a Duramax truck, if you're familiar with the Allison transmission, that's a 1000 series. Well, the 2000 is just a little heavy, more heavy duty, and could come with or without park. Mine had park. So that was the engine combination that was going to go in that crew cab dually. And then I came across same guy. I got they're all buddies. I dragged home a 97 four-wheel drive 1-ton Dodge, low mileage, truck's rotted out, and I pulled the 12-valve out of that. So that was an even better candidate. I prefer the 12-valve P-pump over the 24-valve engine, but either one would have been a good choice. But in 2011, I wanted to buy a bigger tractor. I always had my tractor that just sat there all winter because it was open cab, and I always had some beat-up plow truck. And it was actually my wife that suggested, it wasn't even my wife at the time, maybe that's why I married her. She said, why don't you just get a big tractor with a cab and put a plow on that? And have a nice set of forks for it, and anything heavy, if you can't lift it with that tractor and a set of forks, so buy a big tractor. Because I had a couple forklifts, and they didn't work out, and they ruined the driveway with them. So she didn't want any more forklifts kicking around. In a joking way. She wouldn't really care either way. But so long story short, I was selling everything I could think of. I sold my Kubota tractor that I had, and I sold a few projects. I had to raise the money because there was no loan involved. We're going to buy a tractor. And tractors aren't cheap. So sacrifices had to be made. I sold a lot of stuff. And regrettably, the dually was one of them. So October 28th, 2011, I took the dually I was driving at the time that I got from my buddy Charlie that I mention all the time. I nicknamed that truck Chuck. Put my trailer that I had built recently behind it, my orange trailer, and loaded the other square body dually on there and took it to my buddy Jim's house. And every October 28th since then, I send him a picture of that fateful day, wanting my truck back. Jokingly, of course. So the other night, I'm talking on the phone, and my buddy Jim calls out of nowhere, leaves a message, jokingly saying, hey, today's the day I was going to sell you the dually. Too bad you didn't pick up. Well, something like that. So I called him right back. And he's kind of considering selling it potentially. I went and looked at it today. It was too cold to start because Jim didn't want the Cummins. He had a 40,000 mile, 96, I believe, 1-ton Chevy with a 6.5 turbo diesel, 4L80E. And that's what he put in there. He did a factory looking job, probably better than factory, because those trucks in the what they now call OBS style, an 88 and up round truck, they're kind of a bear to work on. I've worked on a whole bunch of them. And I'm not a big fan of the 6.5. However, it's only got 40-something thousand miles on it. And anyway, we're in negotiations, and I'll include a picture at the end of the truck itself and me hauling it, the same picture I send to Jim every year on October 28th. I was trying to add up today, over the years, how many dually pickups I've had, and I am well aware, and most people aren't, I learned the hard way, that a cab chassis is not a dually pickup. Well, it has dual wheels, they share that in common, but the rear end is different, the wheelbase is different, the frame is different. I learned this the hard way. My first truck, now I started drag racing, and I wanted a truck to pull it with, and I got a two-wheel drive, 1-ton, 83 Chevy 350, the truck 4-speed SM465, dual wheels. I thought I had it all. I was going to buy a body and put it on there. Guess what? The frame's 4 inches longer, cab, back of the cab to axle dimension. Cross members are different. The frame's flat, not humped, and the rear end is drastically narrower. So, for interest of counting, I counted those as dually pickups, but they're not a dually pickup. And they will mess you up if you think they are. Much like if you buy a dually pickup, take the body off and go to put a dump body on it, now the rear end's way too wide. So, interesting. The cab chassis had a 14-bolt full floater, and the majority, I've seen them both ways, the dually pickups have a Dana 80. So, if it doesn't have a bolt-in pinion and you got a dually, it's a Dana 80. So last week, or whenever I talked about this wrench, M12 Milwaukee, I took in a trade and was complaining it was half-inch drive. I haven't stopped using it since. I used it putting that strange 9-inch Ford together. I just used it a minute ago to swap the vices in this Kurt vise. And this thing is handy. You want to hang on to it, but several people suggested in the comments on this channel to just get a 3/8 anvil and swap it over. And I was pretty excited because I see anvils for $20 or $30. But I couldn't find one that matched up with my part number. So I called Milwaukee day before yesterday, and that is not an option on this particular one, of course. So I guess I'll just enjoy it in half-inch. The reason why I don't want to run an adapter is when I think of using one of these, I worked in a dealership, and I have several air-powered ones, and typically, especially a front-wheel drive, you're down between the inner fender and the engine trying to do stuff where you can't get an impact in there, and I'm using it on a right angle. But here on this bench stuff, well, even this it worked out good in here because obviously I couldn't get an impact in there, but it's a neat rig, and I'm having fun with it. Now, the vise, sitting a week ago Saturday night, I got a message out of the blue from John Sandell, Tube Chassis Design, probably the best chassis builder I know, definitely the best welder. And he was been watching my videos, and he was laughing at some of the concoctions I've come up with the notch tube, and he just said, get some tall jaws for your Kurt vise and hold the tubing at any angle you want. Simple, right? And take a bolt, 5/8 fine or half-inch fine, whatever your hole saw is, cut the bolt off and use put it in the mill like this. So, with a collet. So this is actually the arbor out of my cheap Harbor Freight tubing notcher that I stole the vise off of right there. I continue to pot it out. And this setup will work. Now I just got the jaws swapped in the vise just seconds before I started filming. He didn't mention V-blocks, but I had them, and I got plenty of throw in the vise, so I don't see why this isn't super secure and wouldn't do a great job on the mill, notching tubing. I love it when people that really know what they're talking about reach out and help you out. Or anybody that helps out, for that matter. I don't want to exclude anybody who's willing to help. Because you never know when you trigger an idea, or it's just all good. What do they say? A rising tide raises all boats. So, on that same vein, another friend of mine, who I've only met through this channel, I've never met him in person, another enabler, if you will, sends me a link to this. You may recognize it from the ATSG manual. This device is a Kent Moore tool designed. You bolt it on the rear servo, we'll take the cover off. You bolt it in there with the band in place, and you apply 25 foot-pounds, I believe, to this, and you read what notch is showing here in this pin that goes into the case to apply the band. So you're squishing the band down against the drum, and whatever notch shows, if you go in the manual, that ATSG manual, it tells you the correct pin length you should have on the servo. The only problem with that, now I have another way of checking it, and I don't have any problem in that area whatsoever. I just shove the piston in there as long as it starts moving the center pin. By the time it breaks the plane of the O-ring, the plane of the bore, I should say, they just work fine. I air check them. Everything works fine. This tells you what pin you should have, but every Turbo 400 I have stripped here, the pins are all the 2-groove pin. So they're all the same length for the ones I have. So I'd need an assortment of pins, or you'd have to weld on the end, I suppose. But it gives you all the dimensions, and I'm going to try it next time I put a transmission together just to see how it comes out. It was $45 shipped, both pieces, because they sell, of course, pieces separate, and this wouldn't do you much good, no, with this, but this happened to be together. And this is also a situation where I was on eBay. I could have made an offer because that was an option, but I think that's pretty fair shipped, $45 for a Kent Moore tool. And we'll see if it's useful or not in the future. This is the nicer of the two Kurt vices that I have. I believe they're rated 6-inch. Kurt vise is like the standard in the machining industry. It was a gift given to me in pieces, missing half the parts, and I found enough stuff online and bolts that I had to put it together properly. And I had a brand new set of jaws that I had bought for that Kurt vise, and I employed them here, so it actually, and those jaws were expensive. These are just aluminum jaws. I bought them. I could have made them, but they were $23 shipped. So that's what I got. So in closing, on the Christmas Eve extravaganza, I'm going to go back in the house, probably eat some pie. I wish somebody else made it, but that was my job too. Pumpkin pie. But I've done pretty well the last few nights. I worked on this bench. Now, I was looking at some pitches the other night, looking for pitches that dually. And back in August, this bench, I always keep this bench pretty open. Other than the current project I'm working on, which is this transmission and a few tools. And I've only let tools creep in after I allowed that crane that I lift the transmissions up and down with. Once you start putting stuff on the bench, it seems to, catch on. It's like algae. It just keeps growing. But I'd gotten depressed. I was down to a very small working area, and I just had too many transmission parts and other things sitting around. So you can't just put them somewhere else, which is a lot of times the only time I have to clean is just move stuff out of the way, and then it's in the way somewhere else. I actually tried to put it away, kind of. Now I need to go through my transmission shelf because I made a mess out of that, but that was happening on its own anyway. So I'm going to try to keep the bench free and clear. So I'll get this transmission put together this week, I hope. And I'm going to show you one more thing. The other night when I'm putting that strange 9-inch Ford together, I had to chuckle because I'm sitting there doing math. I could have used my calculator, but this is more fun. And if they just told you in school that math could help you set up a ring and pinion if you're into hot rods, you'd pay more attention. All right, Merry Christmas, and I'll talk to you soon.